For our presentation on the role of transit and paratransit, we're very pleased to welcome Steve Yaffe, who is the Transit Service Manager for the Arlington County, Virginia Department of Environmental Services Transportation Division. In that position, he oversees planning and operations for Arlington Transit, which is the fixed route system, as well as STAR, which is their specialized transit for Arlington residents. STAR is the local paratransit association alternative to Metro Access, which is the DC metropolitan area ADA paratransit service. And Steve comes to us with a vast experience in both transit and paratransit. He previously worked in paratransit with the Washington area WMATA's Metro Access Service, as well as FastTran in Fairfax County, and his fixed route experience is with RT Metro in Sacramento and Houston Metro. Steve is a past member of the Transportation Research Board Paratransit Committee of the Fairfax Area Long-Term Care Coordinating Council and the Board of Independence, the Center for Northern Virginia. So he brings not only transportation and paratransit experience, but also experience working in aging issues and disability. So with that, Steve, I'm going to turn it over to you. We're happy to have you.
Thank you, Virginia. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the role of transit in addressing the mobility needs of people with dementia and their caregivers. People with dementia accompanied by caregivers may be able to safely use transit, but bus drivers need training to assist someone who is riding alone. Let's start with a brief introduction to transit, which offers an ever-widening range of services. Many of us are familiar with fixed route services, that green line on the upper left. The vehicle always takes the same route with a sequence of established stops. It could be a train, light rail, streetcar, bus, or smaller circulator-type vehicle. And the stops tend to be 2 to 4 blocks apart. Now, if you look at that diagram in the upper right of the screen, in suburban neighborhoods, a fixed route bus service can be flexible. This diagram is from Boston. That yellow bus below it is from Dallas. It's used in a number of places. And then those areas, stops are fewer and spaced further apart, and riders can prearrange buses to deviate off the route. And then let's talk about paratransit in a little more detail. Paratransit, alongside transit, has a widening variety of shared ride options, and we'll talk about some of these in detail, including human service agency rides, public dial ride, regular group shopping, non-emergency medical transportation. It can be curb to curb, where the driver only assists the rider into and out of the vehicle. It can be door to door, where the driver assists to and from the building entrance. It can be hand to hand or door through door escort transportation. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. Paratransit can be provided by dedicated vehicles and drivers, by taxis or the new app-based taxi type companies such as Uber or Lyft, or by volunteers. And now we have a new form coming out called Flex Zone or microtransit, where, and you see a diagram in the upper middle of the screen, neighborhoods are bounded by a zone, basically zone boundaries. These neighborhoods cannot adequately support a fixed route bus route, so a small bus is assigned within this defined zone, taking people to and from the transit hub and maybe other destinations in that zone. That diagram is from an area north of Denver. It's served by RTD, their call and ride service, and that connects people to their light rail station. Let's get into a little more detail on some of the paratransit services. In this slide, adult day healthcare transportation. Properly done, it's hand-to-hand transport, where the transportation provider arranges with the caregivers to meet the driver at home, at the door. Driver provides assistance from the building to the vehicle. And at the other end, the driver assists from the vehicle to the building entrance where they're met by staff people. Of course, before we pick up the rider at the house, we want to make sure that the rider has a house key if the rider is expected to return to an empty house, or that the client file has an emergency drop-off option in case there's an emergency and the caregiver can't get back home. Some systems may arrange with a nursing home if the vehicle repeatedly is unable to drop the rider off. Occasionally people with dementia have issues, and we have to know that. Does the rider have conflicts with other riders, or do they have a best friend riding on that same bus? So providers will use a seating chart to keep people apart or together. Does the rider resist using seat belts or behave unsafely when riding? In that case, we need to assign that rider to a bus with an attendant. And if you have a bus with several people going to adult daycare and they're not going to the same they're riding together, but they're not going to the same location, attendants are definitely helpful. Now, a subset of this is the Program for All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly, known as PACE. PACE provides a comprehensive interdisciplinary medical and social service to certain frail, elderly people living in the community. Most of them are dually eligible for Medicare and Medicaid. And the purpose of PACE is to provide coordinated care to enable them to continue living in the community rather than being institutionalized in a nursing home. So in the PACE program, every bus has to have an attendant. And the attendant goes into the house to assist the rider, put on a coat, be ready, and observes the conditions inside, because the bus attendant actually is part of the care team. Care team could include a social worker, physical therapy, occupational therapy, recreational therapy, and the team has weekly meetings to discuss how each client is doing. Rides by this transportation service are provided to all supportive services, not just the adult daycare program. Could be medical appointments, therapy, other purposes. And I've got the website up on the screen. All these clients are eligible for nursing home placement, but the purpose is to enable them to live in the community. It's less expensive, and it's more fulfilling for the individual. Another subset, of course, is ADA Paratransit, ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. It is for people who cannot ride fixed route transit due to a disability. With ADA, there's no restrictions on the purpose of the trip. Everyone must go through the certification process. People who physically can't get to and from the bus stop are eligible if the buses are not accessible, which is rare these days. They may, to wheelchair users, for example, they'd be eligible. And those who don't know when to board, when to alight from the bus, or how to transfer between routes, how to navigate the system, they would be eligible for ADA Paratransit. However, it's not hand-to-hand service. Riders are expected to travel independently, either curb to curb or door to door. There's no handoffs, but they can bring a personal care attendant for no extra charge. ADA Paratransit Services don't provide the bus attendants, but if a rider has someone riding with, that's fine. The fare is expected when boarding. It's usually double the fixed route fare. Some systems do have a prepayment program. There's other types of paratransit. There's dial-a-ride, Medicaid, non-emergency medical transportation, NEMT for short, and group shopping, group recreational trips. I want to add in that NEMT is only Medicaid. Medicare does not pay for transportation except for emergency ambulance services. In these services, rides are generally booked 1 to 7 days in advance. They can be regular standing order, pick me up every Tuesday at 10 o'clock, or they can be called in, dial a ride. You can book a ride by when you want to be picked up or when you want to arrive. Service days and hours will vary from system to system. They generally are either curb to curb or door to door as needed. Again, PCAs can ride with a companion who is not a PCA. If you want to take a PCA and someone else, that someone else may have to pay a fare. Again, attendance normally not provided. And again, fares are generally charged. Now, what happens when someone is riding the bus unattended, someone with dementia? How is that dealt with? Driver training, bus operator training, as we refer to them, is vital. It really is, so that the bus operator understands what might be happening. So we train bus operators to take notice. Is the driver dressed inappropriately for the weather or for being out in public? Is the rider disoriented to the surroundings? Someone may look completely normal, but keep asking the same questions over and over again with difficulty understanding your response. Sometimes the rider will get frustrated and just not know where they're going. So recognizing that there may be a problem is the first half of training bus operators to deal with an individual with dementia. And then the second half, of course, is, okay, now what to do? Be calm, be friendly, provide good customer service, short sentences in the answers, be clear and concise, and always calm, and always be willing to patiently repeat the answers. Remind the rider of the upcoming stops, especially if the rider does know where they need to get off, and give that reassurance that the rider will be reminded when it's time to get off the stop. If the alarm bell is going off, gee, I'm wondering if this person's going to wander off. Bus operators have communications with dispatch. A good practice is to communicate with dispatch. I let off physical description of the rider. I'm kind of concerned about him or her. I let him off at this stop. Please make a note of it if there should be a problem. And I thank you for your interest. My contact information is on the screen. Be glad to answer any questions. Paratransit is a dynamic field and a lot of change is happening. Thank you very much.